The icy waters of the Missouri River closed over Rosalie McKenna's head as the rope around her ankles dragged her deeper into the murky depths, her lungs burning as she fought against the weight pulling her towards certain death. Just hours before, she had watched her husband Daniel's blood stain the wooden floors of their trading post, while three outlaws ransacked everything they had built together, and now she was seconds away from joining him in death when a shadow moved along the riverbank, a Cheyenne warrior whose intervention would not only save her life, but set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything the frontier had taught both their peoples about trust, justice, and survival. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had begun like any other at McKenna's trading post, nestled in a bend of the Missouri River, where the Montana Territory stretched endlessly toward distant mountains. Rosalie hummed softly while organizing bolts of fabric that had arrived on the last supply wagon from Fort Benton, her calloused hands moving with practiced efficiency through the morning routine that had become second nature after 3 years. On the frontier, outside, Daniel was shoeing a horse for Jake Morrison, one of the local ranchers who depended on their services. The rhythmic ring of hammer against anvil created a comforting backdrop to Rosalie's work, a sound that had come to represent security and purpose in their remote corner of the world. At 26, Rosalie had traded her comfortable life in St. Louis for this harsh but honest existence beside the man she loved. The trading post itself stood as testament to their determination and partnership. Daniel had built the main structure. With logs, he'd felled himself, creating a sturdy building that served as both store and fortress against the unpredictable dangers of frontier life. The interior reflected Rosalie's organizational skills and eye for business. Shelves lined with everything from ammunition and tools to fancy ribbons and imported tea, all carefully arranged to maximize both storage and appeal to their diverse clientele. Their customers ranged from grizzled mountain men seeking supplies for extended trapping expeditions to ranch wives desperate for news from civilization and quality goods unavailable at military posts. Rosalie had learned to read people quickly, distinguishing between honest traders and potential troublemakers with an intuition that had served them well in this lawless territory. The McKenna trading post had become more than just a business. It was a vital link in the chain of civilization that connected isolated homesteaders and ranchers with the wider world. Mail arrived sporadically through their establishment, bringing precious letters from family back east. News traveled along with the supply wagons, carrying information about everything from Indian movements to political developments in the territorial capital. Rosalie's journey to this remote outpost had begun 4 years earlier in the drawing rooms and tea parlors of St. Louis society. Born to parents who owned a successful dry goods business, she had received the education expected of a merchant's daughter, enough schooling to manage household accounts and correspondence, but not so much as to interfere with her primary purpose of making an advantageous marriage. Her first meeting with Daniel McKenna had occurred at a church social where he was visiting relatives during a rare trip back to civilization. Unlike the pale, soft-handed clerks and junior partners who usually courted merchant daughters, Daniel possessed a vitality and purpose that immediately captured Rosalie's attention. His hands bore the honest calluses of physical labor, his face showed the weathering of outdoor work, and his eyes held a vision of building something meaningful in the vast wilderness beyond the Mississippi. Their courtship had been brief, but intense. Daniel spoke passionately about the opportunities waiting in the Montana Territory, land for claiming, resources for harvesting, communities for building. He painted pictures of a life where hard work and intelligence mattered more than family connections or inherited wealth. where a man and woman could create their own destiny through determination and mutual support. Rosalie's parents had been horrified by her decision to marry Daniel and follow him west. Her father argued that the frontier was no place for a properly raised young lady, while her mother predicted disaster from exposure to the crude realities of wilderness life. They offered to establish Daniel in their St. Louis business if he would abandon his plans for Western expansion, but Rosalie had already glimpsed the limitations of her prescribed social role. The endless round of calling cards and charity committees, the carefully managed conversations that never addressed anything of real importance, the expectation that she would remain ornamental rather than useful, all of it felt suffocating. Compared to Daniel's vision of genuine partnership in building something substantial, their wedding had been a small affair, attended primarily by Daniel's relatives who understood his Western ambitions. Rosalie's parents attended but made their disapproval clear through every gesture and expression. 2 weeks later, the newlyweds departed St. Louis in a loaded wagon, carrying supplies for establishing their trading post and beginning their new life together. The journey west had tested every assumption Rosalie had held about her own capabilities. The first night sleeping under stars had been magical, but subsequent weeks of rain, mud, equipment failures, and constant vigilance against various dangers had pushed her beyond anything her sheltered upbringing had prepared her for. She learned to cook over open fires, to load and fire Daniel's rifle, to read weather signs and terrain features that could mean the difference between safe travel and deadly mistakes. By the time they reached the site Daniel had selected for their trading post, Rosalie had transformed from a decorative society miss into a capable frontier partner. The location he had chosen demonstrated his strategic thinking, a natural stopping point where travelers could rest and resupply, positioned to serve multiple communities while remaining defensible against potential threats. Building the trading post had required every skill they could develop or acquire. Daniel handled the heavy construction, while Rosalie managed logistics, organizing supplies, maintaining schedules, solving problems that threatened to derail their progress. They worked from dawn to dusk through the summer months, racing to complete essential structures before winter weather made further construction impossible. Their first winter had nearly broken them. Isolated by snow and bitter cold, dependent entirely on their stored supplies and each other's company, they had discovered both the strengths and weaknesses in their relationship. Arguments that might have been smoothed over by social distractions in civilization became serious conflicts when there was no escape from each other's presence, but they had also discovered deeper sources of strength. Rosalie's quick mind proved invaluable for solving practical problems, while Daniel's steady determination carried them through moments when the challenges seemed insurmountable. By spring, they had emerged as true partners, their relationship tested and strengthened by shared hardship. The second year had brought their first real success as traders. Word spread among the scattered population that McKenna's trading post offered fair prices, quality goods, and honest dealing. Rosalie's ability to remember customer preferences and maintain accurate accounts helped build loyalty, while Daniel's reputation for reliable craftsmanship in his blacksmith work brought steady additional income. They had also begun to understand the complex relationships that governed frontier life. The nearby Cheyenne bands were not the savage raiders depicted in Eastern newspapers, but sophisticated peoples with their own political structures, trade networks, and territorial concerns. Daniel had made contact with several Cheyenne leaders, establishing tentative trade relationships that benefited both sides while reducing the possibility of conflict. Rosalie had been initially terrified during these early encounters with Cheyenne traders, her imagination filled with the lurid stories she had absorbed from dime novels and sensational newspaper accounts. But observation had gradually replaced fear with respect. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. The Cheyenne who visited their trading post demonstrated dignity, intelligence, and sophisticated understanding of trade relationships that challenged every stereotype she had believed. Their third year had brought expansion and prosperity. The trading post now carried a full range of goods. Their blacksmith business had grown to serve customers from a 50-mile radius, and they had begun accumulating the capital necessary for further investment. Daniel talked about opening a second location, or perhaps investing in livestock to serve the growing ranching community. Rosalie had also discovered talents she never knew she possessed. Her natural gift for languages had enabled her to learn basic Cheyenne vocabulary, facilitating trade relationships and earning respect from their indigenous customers. Her ability to organize complex inventories and track multiple accounts had proven invaluable as their business grew. Most importantly, she had developed confidence in her own judgment and capabilities that would have been impossible in her previous social environment. But success had also brought new dangers. Their prosperity had attracted attention from less scrupulous individuals who preferred taking wealth by force rather than earning it through honest work. The isolation that had once provided freedom from social constraints now meant vulnerability to criminal predation. Daniel had taken precautions, reinforcing the trading post's construction, maintaining weapons in good repair, establishing communication with neighbors who could provide mutual assistance in emergencies. But the vast distances and sparse population of the Montana Territory meant that help was often days away when trouble arrived. On this particular morning, Rosalie had noticed nothing unusual as she went about her regular duties. The fabric shipment from Fort Benton represented their largest single investment to date, bolts of quality material that would appeal to ranch wives planning new dresses or home furnishings. She carefully recorded each item in their inventory ledger, calculating potential profits and planning display arrangements that would maximize sales appeal. The sound of approaching horses hadn't alarmed her initially. Travelers frequently stopped at their trading post, and morning arrivals were common among those who preferred to travel during cooler hours. It was only when the horses stopped and she heard harsh voices speaking in tones that suggested confrontation rather than commerce that Rosalie felt the first stirrings of unease. Through the window, she could see three men dismounting from heavily loaded horses. Their appearance immediately triggered her warning instincts, unwashed, heavily armed, and possessing the predatory alertness of men accustomed to taking what they wanted through violence. These were not ordinary travelers seeking supplies or services. The leader, a tall man with a prominent scar across his left cheek, surveyed their property with calculating eyes while his companions spread out to flank Daniel's position near the forge. Their movements demonstrated military precision that suggested organized criminality rather than opportunistic theft. Rosalie's hand moved instinctively toward the loaded shotgun Daniel kept behind the counter, but she forced herself to remain calm and observe. Premature action might escalate a situation that could still potentially be resolved through peaceful means. Daniel had often emphasized the importance of reading situations accurately before committing to irreversible courses of action. "You, McKenna!" the scarred leader called out, his voice carrying the flat authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "I am," Daniel replied carefully, setting down his hammer while keeping his hands visible. "How can I help you, gentlemen? Name's Craw. We're looking for supplies and information. Heard you run a profitable establishment here." Rosalie caught the subtle emphasis on profitable and understood immediately that these men had not come as ordinary customers. Their interest lay not in purchasing goods, but in seizing the wealth those goods represented. "We try to serve our customers well," Daniel answered diplomatically. What supplies do you need?" Craw's smile held no warmth. All of them. The confrontation that followed unfolded with terrifying swiftness. Daniel made a move toward the rifle he kept near his forge, but Craw's companions were already in position to prevent any resistance. A gunshot echoed across the water as Daniel stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder where blood began spreading. "Through his shirt. That was to get your attention," Craw said conversationally. "The next one will be more permanent unless you cooperate fully." Rosalie watched in horror as the three outlaws forced Daniel to his knees while they began systematically, looting everything of value from the trading post. Years of careful accumulation disappeared into their saddlebags, money from their cash box, valuable trade goods, personal items that represented irreplaceable memories of their life together. "Where's the woman?" Craw asked after completing his initial survey of their property. "There is no woman," Daniel lied desperately. "I live alone here." One of the outlaws laughed harshly. "Saw her through the window, boss. Pretty little thing organizing fabric, like she was planning a Sunday social." Craw's scarred face split in a predatory grin. "Bring her out here." The next few minutes became a nightmare of violence and terror that would haunt Rosalie for the rest of her life. The outlaws dragged her from the trading post despite her struggles, forcing her to watch as they continued their systematic destruction of everything she and Daniel had built together. "You folks have done real well for yourselves," Craw observed, examining a handful of gold coins from their strongbox. "Question is, where's the rest of it? Place this profitable has to have more money hidden somewhere." "That's everything," Daniel said through gritted teeth. Blood loss from his shoulder wound, weakening his voice. "We invested our profits back into inventory and improvements." Craw studied him with the cold assessment of a man experienced in extracting truth through violence. "Maybe. But I've learned that folks usually keep something extra for emergencies. My associates here are going to help you remember where you might have forgotten about hidden assets." What followed was a systematic torture session designed to force confession of wealth that didn't exist. Rosalie screamed as the outlaws beat Daniel with rifle butts and burning brands, demanding information about money that existed only in their criminal imagination. Each blow seemed to echo through her chest, each cry of pain from her husband tearing something irreparable in her soul. "Please," she begged, "we've given you everything. We're just simple traders trying to make an honest living." "Honest living," Craw repeated mockingly. "Out here where nobody asks questions about where goods come from or where money goes. I think you're more than simple traders, lady." The accusation revealed the twisted logic that justified their violence. In Craw's mind, any success achieved on the frontier must be criminal in nature because legitimate prosperity was beyond his own capabilities. The idea that hard work and honest dealing could create wealth challenged his fundamental assumptions about how the world operated. As Daniel's resistance weakened under the sustained brutality, Rosalie realized with crystalline clarity that these men intended to kill them both, regardless of what information they provided. This wasn't robbery. It was elimination of potential witnesses to their crimes. The final phase of the attack unfolded with the casual efficiency of men who had performed similar acts many times before. When Daniel finally lost consciousness from blood loss and trauma, Craw examined him with professional detachment. "He's finished," he announced. "Question now is what to do with his woman." "She's seen our faces," one of his companions pointed out. "Can't leave witnesses." "True," Craw agreed. "But maybe we have some fun first. Been a long ride, and it's not often we encounter such refined company in these parts." The implications of his words sent ice through Rosalie's veins. She understood now that her death was inevitable, but the manner of it remained horrifyingly uncertain. "Please," she whispered, "just make it quick." Craw laughed. "Oh, we will, eventually. But first, you're going to help us with something." They forced her to help load their horses with the stolen goods, a final humiliation that added psychological torture to physical terror. Every item she handed over represented months of careful planning and investment, dreams and hopes, now feeding the greed of violent men who created nothing but destruction. When the loading was complete, Craw produced a length of rope and began fashioning a noose with practiced hands. "Nothing personal, lady, just business. Can't have folks spreading stories about our operations." But instead of the hanging Rosalie expected, Craw tied one end of the rope around her ankles and the other to a heavy saddlebag filled with metal trade goods. The intent became clear as his companions dragged her toward the river's edge. "Drowning leaves fewer traces than gunshots," Craw explained with casual brutality. "And the current will carry you downstream, where nobody will find the body for weeks." As they forced her into the water, Rosalie's last coherent thought was a desperate prayer that Daniel had died quickly and without knowing her final fate. The icy Missouri closed over her head as the weighted rope dragged her down toward the muddy bottom, her lungs burning as she fought uselessly against the inexorable pull toward death. Above her, the outlaws watched with professional satisfaction as bubbles rose to mark her descent. In their experience, drowning victims rarely survived more than a few minutes underwater, and the river would dispose of the evidence more efficiently than any grave they might dig. What they failed to notice was the lone figure watching from concealment among the willows on the far bank, a Cheyenne warrior named Iron Hawk, who had been observing their trading post for signs of military activity when the attack began. His people had complex relationships with white settlers, relationships that required careful intelligence gathering to navigate safely. Iron Hawk had witnessed the entire brutal assault while calculating his options. 3 armed men represented a significant threat even to an experienced warrior, and intervention would likely result in his own death without saving the victims. But as he watched Rosalie's desperate struggle beneath the water, ancient codes of honor compelled action regardless of personal risk. The decision that would change both their lives forever was made in the space between one heartbeat and the next, as Iron Hawk dove from the riverbank into the Missouri's cold current, racing against time to reach a drowning woman whose survival would challenge everything both their peoples believed about trust, justice, and the possibility of understanding, across the vast cultural divide that separated their worlds. Iron Hawk's powerful strokes cut through the Missouri's treacherous current as he fought against time and nature to reach the sinking woman. The weighted rope had already dragged Rosalie McKenna 15 feet below the surface, her desperate struggles growing weaker with each passing second as her lungs screamed for air that existed only in the world above. The Cheyenne warrior's decision to intervene violated every tactical principle his war chiefs had drilled into him since childhood, engaging 3 armed enemies while encumbered by a drowning victim represented suicide disguised as heroism. But the same cultural code that had shaped his military training also demanded protection of the helpless, regardless of their tribal affiliation or the personal cost of such protection. Iron Hawk had been born into the Dog Soldiers, the elite warrior society that served as both military force and spiritual guardians for his people. His father, Standing Bear, had earned legendary status during the conflicts with white expansion, while his uncle, Red Cloud Walker, served as one of the band's most respected war chiefs. The expectations placed upon Iron Hawk from birth had been both privilege and burden, to uphold family honor while navigating increasingly complex relationships between Cheyenne bands and the encroaching white civilization. At 29, Iron Hawk had already proven himself in combat against rival tribes and military forces. His war record included victories that had earned him recognition throughout the northern plains, while his wisdom in council had begun to establish him as a leader capable of bridging the gap between traditional warrior culture and the diplomatic necessities of a changing world. But none of his previous experiences had prepared him for the moral complexity of this moment. The white settlers at McKenna's trading post had maintained respectful relationships with his people, offering fair trade and honest dealing that contrasted sharply with the exploitation practiced by most frontier merchants. Daniel McKenna had even taken the unprecedented step of learning basic Cheyenne phrases, demonstrating a level of cultural respect that had earned grudging admiration from tribal elders who generally viewed all whites with suspicion. The attack Iron Hawk had witnessed represented everything his people despised about white civilization: the casual brutality, the greed that motivated senseless violence, the complete disregard for any values beyond immediate material gain. These outlaws embodied the worst characteristics that Cheyenne storytellers attributed to the pale invaders who brought chaos wherever they established their presence. Yet, the woman now drowning in the Missouri River had never harmed his people. She had shown courtesy during trade negotiations, had attempted to learn Cheyenne customs, and had always maintained the respectful distance that both cultures recognized as appropriate for cross-cultural interactions. Her death would serve no strategic purpose for his people, while eliminating one of the few whites who had demonstrated genuine respect for indigenous ways. Ironhawk's dive carried him deep beneath the surface, his trained eyes quickly locating Rosalie's thrashing form in the murky water. The heavy trade goods tied to her ankles had created an anchor that no amount of desperate swimming could overcome, but the rope itself provided the solution to her predicament. His knife, honed to razor sharpness for both combat and practical purposes, sliced through the binding in one swift motion. Rosalie's body immediately began rising toward the surface, but her struggles had ceased entirely. Ironhawk wrapped one arm around her waist while stroking powerfully upward with the other, his own lungs burning as he pushed the limits of his underwater endurance. The surface seemed impossibly distant, and for a terrifying moment he wondered if his rescue attempt would simply result in 2 deaths instead of 1. They broke the surface together in an explosion of spray and desperate gasping. Rosalie hung, limp in his arms, her face blue from oxygen deprivation, water streaming from her mouth and nose. Ironhawk treaded water while supporting her weight, his trained ear already detecting the sounds of pursuit from the riverbank above. The outlaws had noticed their victim's disappearance and were crashing through the riverside vegetation in search of evidence. Their harsh voices carried clearly across the water as they argued about whether the woman could have survived her drowning and what action they should take to ensure no witnesses remained alive. Ironhawk made split-second tactical calculations while maintaining their position in the concealing shadow of an overhanging willow. The current was carrying them downstream, away from immediate danger, but Rosalie required immediate medical attention that he couldn't provide while remaining in the water. He needed to reach shore without alerting the outlaws to their survival, then transport an unconscious woman to safety across terrain that offered minimal concealment. The warrior's knowledge of local geography provided the solution. A quarter-mile downstream, Beaver Creek joined the Missouri through a narrow channel concealed by dense vegetation. The creek led inland toward traditional Cheyenne camping grounds, where his people maintained seasonal settlements during their periodic movements through the territory. Ironhawk began swimming toward the creek mouth, towing Rosalie's unconscious form while staying close to the bank, where overhanging branches provided visual concealment. The effort required careful balance between speed and stealth, moving quickly enough to reach medical help before Rosalie died from her injuries, while remaining invisible to the armed killers who were now systematically searching the shoreline for any trace of their escaped victim. The outlaws, Voices gradually faded as the current carried the unlikely pair beyond their immediate search area, but Ironhawk understood that their danger had only temporarily diminished. Craw and his companions possessed the persistence of professional killers who understood that loose ends could prove fatal to their continued operations. They would expand their search systematically until they either confirmed Rosalie's death or eliminated her as a potential witness. Reaching Beaver Creek required 20 minutes of exhausting effort. Ironhawk's powerful physique had been conditioned by years of warfare and hunting, but swimming while supporting an unconscious burden tested even his considerable endurance. By the time he dragged Rosalie onto the muddy bank at the creek mouth, his own strength was nearly depleted. Rosalie remained unconscious, her breathing shallow and irregular. Ironhawk quickly assessed her condition using medical knowledge that combined traditional Cheyenne healing techniques with practical battlefield experience. Her pulse was weak but steady, suggesting that the drowning hadn't caused permanent damage to her heart. But the blue tinge to her skin and the water still trickling from her lungs indicated serious respiratory distress that required immediate intervention. Ironhawk positioned Rosalie on her side and began applying rhythmic pressure to her back, forcing water from her lungs while encouraging the return of normal breathing patterns. The technique had saved drowning victims before, but success depended on acting quickly enough to prevent permanent brain damage from oxygen deprivation. After several tense minutes, Rosalie suddenly convulsed and began vomiting river water in violent spasms. Ironhawk supported her while she expelled the fluid that had nearly killed her, quietly offering encouragement in his native language, despite knowing she couldn't understand his words. The important thing was that she was alive and breathing, even if her recovery would require extended care. When the immediate crisis passed, Ironhawk faced a new set of challenges. Rosalie remained weak and disoriented, capable of only limited movement under her own power. The nearest Cheyenne camp lay 8 miles inland through terrain that included rocky hills, dense forests, and at least 2 stream crossings. Carrying her the entire distance would require most of a day, while leaving them both vulnerable to pursuit and exposure. More immediately, Ironhawk needed to determine whether this white woman could be trusted with knowledge of Cheyenne locations and movements. The decision to save her life had been based on immediate moral imperatives, but the consequences of that decision now extended far beyond personal honor. Bringing a white person to traditional camping grounds violated security protocols that protected his people from military detection and potential attack. The warriors' internal conflict reflected broader tensions within Cheyenne society about how to respond to white expansion. Traditionalist factions advocated complete separation and armed resistance to any encroachment on tribal territories. Progressive elements argued for selective cooperation and trade relationships that might secure better treatment for their people. Within an increasingly white-dominated political landscape, Ironhawk's own position had evolved through direct experience with both white treachery and occasional white honesty. He had fought against cavalry units that attacked peaceful villages, but had also negotiated successfully with military officers who honored their agreements. The key seemed to lie in distinguishing between whites who could be trusted and those who represented existential threats to indigenous survival. Daniel and Rosalie McKenna had fallen into the trustworthy category through their consistent, respectful behavior during trade interactions. Unlike most frontier merchants, they had never attempted to cheat Cheyenne customers through fraudulent weights, inferior goods, or inflated prices. Daniel had even refused to sell firearms to obviously hostile whites who intended to use them against indigenous peoples. But trust was not the same as alliance, and bringing Rosalie to a Cheyenne camp would cross boundaries that had been carefully maintained for mutual protection. Ironhawk realized he needed to make contact with tribal leadership before proceeding further. The decision about how to handle this situation properly belonged to the Council of Elders, not to an individual warrior acting on personal initiative. The solution came from remembering his grandmother's teachings about emergency protocols. White Dove Woman had been renowned for her wisdom in navigating complex situations that required balancing competing obligations. Her guidance emphasized the importance of seeking spiritual as well as practical counsel when facing unprecedented challenges. A sacred site lay halfway between their current position and the main Cheyenne camp, a natural hot spring surrounded by ancient petroglyphs where tribal members had sought spiritual guidance for countless generations. The location offered both shelter and the opportunity to perform the ceremonies necessary for making proper decisions about Rosalie's fate. Ironhawk gently lifted Rosalie into his arms, noting that consciousness was beginning to return despite her continued weakness. Her eyes fluttered open as he began carrying her away from the creek bank, revealing confusion and terror that were entirely understandable given her recent experiences. "Don't fear," he said in careful English, drawing upon vocabulary learned during trading sessions. "You are safe now. Bad men cannot find you here." Rosalie's attempts to speak resulted only in painful coughing as her throat remained raw from the near drowning. But her eyes showed intelligence and growing awareness of her circumstances. Ironhawk could see her mind working to process the situation. Saved from drowning by an Indian warrior, now being carried through wilderness toward an unknown destination. The trek to the hot springs required 3 hours of careful navigation through increasingly rugged terrain. Ironhawk followed game trails that were invisible to untrained eyes, avoiding open areas where they might be spotted by pursuing outlaws, while maintaining steady progress toward their destination. His knowledge of the landscape came from childhood expeditions with hunting parties and war bands, accumulated over decades of movement through traditional territories. Rosalie drifted in and out of consciousness during the journey, sometimes attempting conversation but mostly conserving her strength for recovery. Ironhawk found himself studying her face during quiet moments, noting the determination that had helped her survive frontier life and the intelligence that had made her a successful trader. These were not the soft, helpless characteristics that Cheyenne stereotypes attributed to white women. The hot springs appeared as they crested a wooded ridge, steam rising from natural pools that had been sacred to the Cheyenne people since time immemorial. Ancient rock art decorated the surrounding cliffs, depicting spiritual visions and hunting scenes created by generations of tribal artists. The site radiated a peaceful energy that seemed to calm even the traumatized woman in Ironhawk's arms. He gently placed Rosalie beside the largest hot spring, where the mineral-rich water maintained a temperature that would aid her recovery without causing additional shock to her system. The warmth would help restore her body temperature, while the minerals would begin healing the various injuries she had sustained during the attack and near drowning. "Medicine water," Ironhawk explained, gesturing toward the springs. "Help healing. Make strong again." Rosalie managed a weak nod of understanding, though her eyes remained clouded with exhaustion and trauma. Ironhawk constructed a shelter using traditional techniques, bent saplings covered with woven grass and bark that would provide protection from weather while remaining invisible to casual observation. As evening approached, he began the ceremonial, preparations necessary for seeking guidance about their unprecedented situation. The ritual required purification through prayer and meditation, followed by a night-long vigil during which spiritual visions might provide direction for handling the complex obligations he had assumed by saving Rosalie's life. The ceremony began with the construction of a sacred fire using traditional methods that produced minimal smoke while generating the spiritual energy necessary for communication with ancestral spirits. Iron Hawk arranged offerings of tobacco and sage around the fire pit, creating a space where the boundaries between physical and spiritual worlds became permeable. Rosalie watched these preparations with obvious fascination despite her weakened condition. Her expression showed respect rather than fear, suggesting an openness to indigenous spiritual practices that contrasted sharply with the typical white reaction of suspicion or hostility towards savage rituals. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice still hoarse but growing stronger. "Asking ancestors for wisdom," Ironhawk replied. "How to help white woman without bringing danger to my people? Very difficult question." His honesty about the challenges her presence created seemed to surprise Rosalie. She had probably expected either immediate abandonment or unquestioning assistance, not the careful consideration of competing obligations that actually governed honorable behavior in Cheyenne culture. "I understand," she said quietly. "You've already risked everything to save my life. I don't want to bring trouble to your family or your tribe." The statement revealed both intelligence and moral sensitivity that impressed Ironhawk. Most whites in his experience demanded assistance, while offering nothing in return, showing no awareness of the costs their presence might impose on indigenous communities. Rosalie's acknowledgement of these complexities suggested a depth of character that justified the risks he had already taken on her behalf. As full darkness settled over the hot springs, Ironhawk began the vision quest that would determine their next steps. The ritual required entering a trance state through meditation and prayer, opening his consciousness to spiritual guidance that transcended ordinary human understanding. Success would provide clear direction for handling Rosalie's situation, while failure would leave him relying solely on his own limited wisdom. The night that followed would prove pivotal for both their lives, as ancient Cheyenne spiritual traditions merged with frontier survival necessities to create possibilities that neither of their cultures had previously imagined. The sacred springs had witnessed many transformations over the centuries, but none quite like the one beginning to unfold as a white woman and Cheyenne warrior sought common ground in a world that insisted such understanding was impossible. Iron Hawk's vigil continued through the long hours before dawn, his prayers rising with the steam from the sacred waters, while Rosalie recovered her strength in the healing warmth of springs that had restored countless others over generations of tribal use. Whatever guidance emerged from this night would shape not only their immediate survival, but the delicate relationships between their peoples, in a territory where trust was as rare and precious as the mineral waters that surrounded them in the darkness. Dawn broke over the sacred hot springs, with Ironhawk still deep in his vision quest, his consciousness floating between the physical world and the spiritual realm, where ancestral voices whispered guidance through the rising mist. Throughout the night, he had maintained his vigil beside the sacred fire, seeking clarity about the unprecedented situation that had thrust a white woman into the heart of Cheyenne territory and tradition. The visions had come in waves, each more vivid and complex than the last. He saw great herds of buffalo darkening the plains, while his ancestors rode among them with lances and arrows, their faces painted for the hunt that sustained all life. He witnessed council fires where tribal elders debated the wisdom of treaties with white officials who spoke promises that dissolved like morning frost. Most disturbing of all, he glimpsed possible futures where his people had vanished entirely, leaving only empty lands where shopping centers and railroad tracks stretched toward horizons that no longer knew the sound of Cheyenne songs. But between these images of past glory and potential catastrophe, other visions emerged that suggested different possibilities. He saw white settlers and Cheyenne families working together to harvest crops that fed both communities. He witnessed trading relationships that enriched all participants without exploitation or violence. Most surprisingly, he observed children of mixed heritage who carried the wisdom of both cultures while belonging fully to neither. Bridges between worlds that had seemed forever separated by mutual mistrust and fear. As the first rays of sunlight penetrated the morning mist, Ironhawk's spiritual journey reached its culmination. Standing before him in the vision was his grandmother, White Dove Woman, who had passed into the spirit world 3 winters earlier. Her presence radiated the same combination of fierce love and practical wisdom that had guided his childhood and shaped his understanding of honor and obligation. "Grandson," she spoke without words, her voice resonating directly in his consciousness, "you have witnessed the great testing that comes to all peoples when their world changes beyond recognition. The woman you saved represents more than one life. She carries the possibility of understanding between enemies who might become allies if wisdom prevails over fear." White Dove Woman gestured toward Rosalie, who slept peacefully beside the healing springs, her face no longer bearing the blue pallor of near death, but showing the healthy flush of returning strength. "This one has already proven her worth through survival and respect. The choice before you is not whether to help her, but how to help her in ways that serve the greater good of both your peoples." The vision shifted, showing Ironhawk possible. Paths forward like trails branching through mountain passes. One path led to immediately returning Rosalie to white settlements, avoiding any complications, but also missing opportunities for building understanding. Another showed him delivering her to military authorities, who might use her testimony to pursue the outlaws, but could also exploit her presence to justify increased pressure on Cheyenne bands. The third path proved more complex and dangerous, but also held the greatest potential for positive change. In this vision, Ironhawk saw himself bringing Rosalie to his people not as a prisoner or burden, but as a witness to Cheyenne wisdom and honor. Her experience of indigenous hospitality and justice could plant seeds of understanding that might grow into broader peace between the communities sharing this contested territory. "The greatest courage," White Dove Woman continued, "is not displayed in battle against enemies, but in the willingness to risk everything for the possibility of peace. Your father Standing Bear earned his war honors fighting white soldiers. Your destiny may require earning different honors by teaching white hearts to see beyond their fear and prejudice." The vision began to fade as full daylight replaced the mystical atmosphere of dawn, but White Dove Woman's final words echoed with crystal clarity. "Trust in the wisdom that flows like water, flexible enough to find any path, but persistent enough to overcome any obstacle. The woman you saved may become the key to unlocking doors that have remained closed between our peoples for too long." Ironhawk opened his eyes to find Rosalie watching him with obvious concern. She had awakened during his vision quest, and had respectfully maintained silence while observing his spiritual practices, demonstrating a cultural sensitivity that reinforced the guidance he had received. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. "You've been sitting there motionless for hours. I was beginning to worry that something was wrong." Her concern for his welfare, despite her own traumatic experiences, provided further confirmation of the character assessment his grandmother's spirit had shared. This was not a woman who thought only of her own needs and comfort, but someone capable of genuine care for others, regardless of their cultural background. "Vision quest finished," Ironhawk replied, rising from his ceremonial position beside the dying fire. "Ancestors give guidance for difficult choice. We go to my people, but first, you must understand what this means." He settled beside her at the hot springs, where the mineral-rich water continued its healing work on her various injuries. The formal manner required for sacred communications gave way to the practical tone necessary for explaining complex realities. Bringing white person to Cheyenne camp is very dangerous, he began. Not dangerous for you. My people follow laws of hospitality for all guests. Dangerous for tribe because some whites use any contact to make trouble with soldiers, with territorial government, with settlers who fear Indians. Rosalie nodded thoughtfully, showing she understood the political implications of her situation. Like if someone claimed your people were harboring a white woman against her will, or trying to use me as leverage in some negotiation. Exactly, Ironhawk confirmed, impressed by her quick grasp of the potential complications. Also dangerous because some of my people believe all whites bring only death and sorrow. They might see helping you as betraying Cheyenne interests for enemy benefit. The warrior paused to consider how much additional context she needed to understand the full complexity of their situation. Cheyenne society was currently divided into several factions with different approaches to managing relationships with white expansion, and bringing Rosalie to the camp would force these philosophical differences into open debate. My band follows Chief Medicine Arrow, who believes some whites can be trusted for trade and peace agreements, Ironhawk continued. But other chiefs say all whites are enemies who must be fought or avoided completely. Your presence will force and counsel to choose between these paths. Rosalie absorbed this information while testing her physical condition. The hot springs had worked remarkable healing effects. Her breathing was clear, her skin had regained normal color, and her strength was returning rapidly. But Ironhawk could see that her emotional recovery from witnessing Daniel's murder and her own near-death would require much longer. What do you think I should do? She asked. I trust your judgment more than my own right now. You saved my life when you could have just walked away and avoided all these complications. The question revealed both wisdom and vulnerability that touched something deep in Ironhawk's chest. Most whites in his experience demanded specific outcomes rather than seeking advice, showing no recognition that indigenous peoples might possess superior knowledge about navigating complex situations. Vision shows 3 paths, he replied. First, path, I take you to nearest white settlement, soldiers or territorial officials. You return to your people quickly, but murderers escape justice and nothing changes between Cheyenne and whites. He gestured toward the east, where distant smoke columns marked the locations of military outposts and civilian settlements. Second, path. We find honest white lawmen. You tell story about husband's murder, maybe outlaws get caught. But this requires trusting white justice system that often fails indigenous peoples. Rosalie's expression showed she understood the historical context behind his skepticism about white legal institutions. The territorial justice system had a well-documented record of bias against indigenous defendants, while showing remarkable lenience toward white crimes against native victims. What's the third path? She asked. Ironhawk met her eyes directly, assessing her readiness for information that would challenge every assumption her upbringing had taught her about Indian-white relationships. Third path, you come to my people, learn Cheyenne ways, show whites that we are not savages who torture and kill prisoners. Your testimony about our honor and hospitality might help build trust between communities. The proposal clearly surprised her. You want me to live with your tribe? For how long? Until you are fully healed in body and spirit, Ironhawk replied. Until you understand enough about Cheyenne culture to speak truthfully about what you have seen. Until the men who killed your husband are brought to justice through methods that satisfy both white and indigenous concepts of proper punishment. The complexity of what he was suggesting began to dawn on Rosalie. This wasn't simply a matter of temporary shelter while she recovered from her injuries, but an immersive cultural experience that would fundamentally change her understanding of indigenous peoples and potentially her entire worldview. Would your people accept me? She asked. I mean, really accept me, not just tolerate me because you rescued me. Ironhawk considered her question carefully, drawing upon his knowledge of tribal politics and the specific personalities who would influence her reception. Some will welcome you because helping strangers brings honor to the band. Some will be suspicious because whites have broken too many promises and caused too much suffering. Some will watch to see whether you respect our ways or demand that we change to accommodate your comfort. He paused to emphasize the most important point. But if you prove yourself worthy of trust through your actions and attitude, Cheyenne, people can become the most loyal friends you will ever know. We judge people by their character, not their skin color or tribal membership. The sincerity in his voice convinced Rosalie that this offer represented a genuine opportunity rather than some elaborate trap or deception. Everything about Ironhawk's behavior since rescuing her had demonstrated honor and concern for her welfare, even when helping her created significant personal risks. "What would I need to do?" she asked. "How would I prove myself worthy of that? Trust. Learn our language, at least enough for basic communication. Respect our customs and spiritual practices, even if you don't fully understand them. Work alongside our women in daily tasks, cooking, gathering, preparing materials for clothing and shelter. Show that you value Cheyenne knowledge, rather than assuming white ways are always superior." Ironhawk's requirements sounded reasonable to Rosalie, particularly given her previous positive experiences with Cheyenne traders at the post. She had already begun learning basic vocabulary during those commercial interactions, and her natural curiosity about different cultures would serve her well in more intensive study. "Most importantly," Ironhawk continued, "you must understand that this choice cannot be reversed easily. Once you enter our camp, you become part of our community temporarily. If you decide later that you cannot adapt to our ways, leaving might be difficult or dangerous depending on circumstances beyond my control." The warning carried implications that Rosalie was still processing when Ironhawk rose and began breaking camp. Her decision would need to be made quickly, before pursuit by the outlaws could threaten both their safety and the security of any Cheyenne settlement they might approach. "We must move soon," he explained while gathering their few possessions. "Bad men still search for you. Every hour we stay in one place increases danger for both of us." Rosalie tested her physical capabilities by standing and walking around the hot springs. The healing waters had worked remarkable improvements, though she still felt weakness and occasional dizziness from her ordeal. More importantly, she felt a clarity of purpose that had been absent since witnessing Daniel's murder. The decision, when it came, felt inevitable rather than difficult. "I want to go with you to your people," she said firmly, "not just because I need protection, but because I want to understand. Daniel always said that fear between different groups came from ignorance, and that understanding was the foundation for any lasting peace." Ironhawk nodded approvingly. "Your husband was wise man. His memory will be honored among Cheyenne people when they learn of his respectful dealings with our traders." As they prepared to leave the sacred site, Ironhawk performed a brief closing ceremony to thank the spirits for their guidance and request continued protection during the journey ahead. Rosalie watched respectfully, beginning to appreciate the spiritual framework that governed Cheyenne decision-making and behavior. The trek to the main Cheyenne camp required most of the day, following traditional routes that avoided areas where white patrols or hostile groups might detect their movement. Ironhawk shared knowledge about reading natural signs, animal tracks that indicated recent human activity, vegetation patterns that revealed underground water sources, weather indicators that predicted storm systems hours before they arrived. "Your people have universities and books," he observed as they walked. "Our people have the land itself as teacher. Both types of knowledge have value, but they work best when combined rather than competing." Rosalie found herself thinking about the implications of his statement as they traveled through landscapes that seemed empty to her urban-trained eyes, but revealed increasing complexity as Ironhawk pointed out details she had never learned to notice. This was education of a type never offered in any school she had attended, knowledge that could literally mean the difference between life and death on the frontier. As afternoon shadows began lengthening, smoke from cooking fires became visible. Through the trees ahead, the Cheyenne camp lay in a protected valley beside a clear running stream, the traditional circular arrangement of teepees reflecting both practical considerations and spiritual beliefs about proper relationships between families and the natural world. "My people," Ironhawk said simply, but Rosalie could hear both pride and affection in his voice. "Now you will learn whether the courage you showed in surviving your ordeal will serve you equally well in adapting to ways that may seem strange, but have sustained my people for countless generations." The moment of truth approached as figures emerged from the camp to observe their arrival. Warriors, women, children, and elders whose collective judgment would determine whether Rosalie McKenna would find sanctuary or rejection among the Cheyenne people, who now represented her only hope for survival and justice in a world that had suddenly become far more complex than anything her previous life had prepared her to navigate. The Cheyenne camp fell silent as Ironhawk emerged from the tree line with Rosalie McKenna walking beside him, her presence creating ripples of tension that spread through the community like stones dropped into still water. Children stopped their games to stare openly at the white woman, while warriors reached instinctively for weapons before recognizing Ironhawk and forcing themselves to relax. Women paused in their daily tasks, their expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion to outright hostility. Chief Medicine Arrow stepped forward from the central lodge, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts as he assessed this unprecedented situation. At 62, he had guided his band through some of the most turbulent decades in Cheyenne history, negotiating the treacherous balance between preserving traditional ways and adapting to the inexorable changes brought by white expansion. His decisions in the next few minutes would determine not only Rosalie's fate, but potentially the future direction of his people's relationship with their white neighbors. "Ironhawk," the chief spoke in Cheyenne, his voice carrying the formal tone reserved for matters of tribal significance. "Explain why you bring a white woman to our sacred grounds without permission from the council." Ironhawk responded in their native language, but Rosalie could understand from his respectful posture and measured delivery that he was providing a full account of the circumstances that had led to her rescue and their subsequent journey to the camp. His explanation triggered immediate reactions from the gathered crowd, gasps of sympathy when he described Daniel's murder, murmurs of approval when he detailed his rescue of Rosalie from drowning, and heated whispers when he outlined his decision to bring her to their sanctuary. Standing Wolf, one of the more militant war chiefs, stepped forward with obvious displeasure. His scarred face and missing left eye testified to decades of conflict with white forces, and his reputation for advocating aggressive resistance to any accommodation with settler interests made him a powerful voice within tribal politics. "This woman brings danger to our families," he declared, switching to English so Rosalie could understand his objections. "White people use any excuse to send soldiers against us. They will say we kidnapped settler woman, use this to justify attack on our camp." Several warriors nodded agreement with Standing Wolf's concerns, while others looked toward Medicine Arrow for guidance. The political dynamics within the band were becoming visible to Rosalie as different factions aligned behind competing approaches to managing her presence. Grey Moon Woman, the eldest female member of the tribal council, moved slowly, but decisively toward Rosalie. Her ancient eyes studied the white woman with penetrating intensity, seeming to look beyond surface appearances to assess character and spiritual condition. As the tribe's senior medicine woman, her evaluation would carry enormous weight in determining Rosalie's reception. "Child," Grey Moon Woman addressed Rosalie in careful English, "you have suffered great loss and pain. This shows in your eyes and in the way you hold your body. But suffering alone does not earn welcome among our people. What do you offer in return for the protection you seek?" The question caught Rosalie off guard with its directness. She had expected either immediate rejection or grudging acceptance based on Ironhawk's intercession, not this challenge to justify her worthiness for inclusion in their community. "I offer my testimony about Cheyenne honor and hospitality," she replied after a moment's consideration. "White people fear you because they don't know you. My experience could help build understanding between our communities." Grey Moon Woman's expression remained unreadable as she considered this response. "White people fear us because we defend our lands and families against those who would steal everything we possess. Will your testimony change this, or will it simply make us appear weak to those who respect only strength?" The sophisticated political reasoning behind the question impressed Rosalie. These were not the simple savages depicted in Eastern newspapers, but thoughtful leaders wrestling with complex strategic decisions that would affect their people's survival. "I believe," Rosalie said carefully, "that strength can be demonstrated through wisdom and justice as well as through warfare. If white settlers understood Cheyenne values and intelligence, they might be more willing to seek peaceful solutions to territorial disputes." Standing Wolf snorted dismissively. "White settlers understand only taking. Give them small territory, they demand larger territory. Show them kindness, they see weakness to exploit. This woman speaks pretty words, but words will not stop the soldiers who come to drive us from our lands. Words might prevent the need for those soldiers," Medicine Arrow interjected thoughtfully. "If this woman can truly help white people see beyond their fear and prejudice, her presence might serve our interests better than continued isolation." The debate continued for nearly an hour, with various tribal members expressing viewpoints that ranged from cautious optimism to fierce opposition. Rosalie listened carefully to the arguments, gaining insight into the pressures and divisions within Cheyenne society that paralleled similar conflicts in white communities about how to manage cross-cultural relationships. During a pause in the formal discussion, Laughing Brook, a young woman approximately Rosalie's age, approached with a bowl of water and a clean cloth. Her gesture of basic hospitality broke some of the tension surrounding Rosalie's arrival while demonstrating the courtesy that Cheyenne culture demanded toward all guests, regardless of their tribal affiliation. "I am Laughing Brook," she said quietly. "Iron Hawk is my cousin. He has told me of your husband's death and your brave survival. My heart feels sorrow for your loss." The simple expression of sympathy touched Rosalie more deeply than any formal welcome could have. Here was genuine human connection that transcended cultural boundaries, offered by someone who had no obligation to show kindness to a stranger from a potentially hostile community. "Thank you," Rosalie replied, accepting the water gratefully. "Your cousin saved my life when he could have ignored my situation completely. I will never forget such courage and honor." Their quiet conversation was interrupted by the arrival of additional tribal members who had been hunting or gathering when Ironhawk and Rosalie first appeared. Among them was Red Feather, Standing Wolf's son, whose reputation as a fierce warrior was balanced by his growing influence among younger tribal members who favored more flexible approaches to white relations. Red Feather studied Rosalie with obvious interest, noting details that suggested careful assessment of both her character and her potential value to tribal interests. At 25, he represented a generation of Cheyenne leaders who had grown up entirely within the context of white expansion, making them more pragmatic about accommodation while remaining committed to preserving essential cultural values. This "Woman knows our language somewhat," he observed after listening to her conversation with Laughing Brook. "And she shows proper respect during our council discussions. These are signs of wisdom that might serve useful purposes." His statement carried implications that extended beyond immediate hospitality. Red Feather was subtly suggesting that Rosalie might possess qualities that could advance tribal interests in ways that went beyond simple testimony about Cheyenne character. As evening approached and the formal debate continued, Ironhawk took Rosalie aside to explain the cultural and political complexities that were shaping her reception. The process she was witnessing represented Cheyenne democracy in action, consensus building that ensured all significant viewpoints received consideration before major decisions were finalized. "Among my people, decisions affecting the entire band must satisfy the concerns of elders, warriors, women, and spiritual leaders," he explained. "This takes time, but it ensures that everyone understands and supports whatever path we choose." Rosalie nodded, contrasting this inclusive approach with the more hierarchical decision-making she had observed in white communities, where territorial officials or military commanders often imposed policies without consulting those who would be most affected by the consequences. "What happens if they can't reach agreement?" she asked. "Then we wait and discuss more until understanding emerges," Ironhawk replied. "Forced decisions create division and resentment that can destroy tribal unity. Better to move slowly with everyone's support than quickly with only partial commitment." As darkness fell, Grey Moon Woman called for a final round of discussion before the council reached its decision. The campfire at the center of the gathering cast dancing shadows across the faces of tribal members whose collective judgment would determine Rosalie's immediate future and potentially influence the broader relationship between their communities. "We have heard arguments for accepting this woman and arguments for sending her away," the medicine woman summarized. "Now we must look beyond immediate concerns to longer consequences. What do the spirits tell us about the path we should choose?" Questions shifted the discussion from political calculation to spiritual guidance, invoking traditions that had guided Cheyenne decision-making for countless generations. Several tribal members shared dreams or visions they had experienced that might relate to Rosalie's arrival, while others offered interpretations of natural signs that could indicate appropriate courses of action. Blackhawk, an elderly warrior, whose spiritual insights were widely respected, spoke last among those offering guidance from the spirit world. His words carried special weight because of his reputation for wisdom and his general skepticism about white motives and character. "3 nights ago, I dreamed of a white buffalo walking among our horses," he revealed. "In the dream, our people were afraid to approach this strange creature, but one young warrior overcame his fear and discovered that the white buffalo brought medicine that healed sick children and strengthened the entire herd. The symbolism was unmistakable to everyone present. White buffalo were among the most sacred and powerful omens in Cheyenne's spiritual tradition, representing profound transformation and the potential for great good or great harm, depending on how such opportunities were handled. "Dreams can be interpreted many ways," Standing Wolf objected. "Perhaps the white buffalo represents the danger of allowing foreign influences to corrupt our traditional ways. Or perhaps," Medicine Arrow countered thoughtfully, "it represents the courage required to embrace opportunities for healing and growth, even when they come in unexpected forms." The debate that followed Blackhawk's revelation was more subdued, but no less intense than the earlier political arguments. Spiritual guidance carried enormous influence in Cheyenne culture, but interpreting such guidance correctly required careful consideration of multiple perspectives and potential meanings. As the discussion neared its conclusion, Medicine Arrow rose to address the assembled band with the formal authority of his position as chief. His words would establish the final decision about Rosalie's status within their community. "We have heard wisdom from our elders, courage from our warriors, compassion from our women, and guidance from the spirit world," he began. "All of these voices must shape our decision about this white woman who has come to us through circumstances that none of us could have predicted." He paused to look directly at Rosalie, his weathered face showing the weight of responsibility for choices that could affect not only her individual fate, but the welfare of everyone in the camp. "Ironhawk acted with honor in saving your life, but bringing you here creates obligations for our entire band. If we accept you among us, you become our responsibility to protect and guide. If we reject you, we risk ignoring spiritual signs that might have brought you here for purposes larger than any of us understand." The chief's measured tone suggested that the decision had already been reached through the consensus-building process, but the formal announcement still held the power to transform Rosalie's circumstances completely. "Therefore, the council has decided that you will remain with us until the next full moon," Medicine Arrow declared. "During this time, you will learn our ways and prove your worthiness through actions rather than words. If you demonstrate respect for our customs and contribute to our community's welfare, you may request permanent acceptance among our people. If you prove unable or unwilling to adapt to Cheyenne ways, you will be escorted safely to the nearest white settlement." The provisional acceptance represented a compromise that satisfied the concerns of various tribal factions while providing Rosalie with the opportunity to prove herself worthy of full inclusion. But it also placed enormous pressure on her to master unfamiliar cultural expectations within a strictly limited time frame. "I accept these terms gratefully," Rosalie replied, rising to address the council with appropriate formality. "I will work hard to prove myself worthy of the trust you are placing in me." Grey Moon Woman smiled for the first time since Rosalie's arrival. "Words are easy, child. Actions will show us the truth of your character. Tomorrow, your real education begins." As the council gathering dispersed and tribal members returned to their evening routines, Rosalie found herself standing at the threshold of an experience that would challenge every assumption her previous life had taught her about cultural differences, human nature, and the possibilities for understanding between communities that history had cast as permanent enemies. 3 weeks into her provisional acceptance among the Cheyenne, Rosalie McKenna had begun to find rhythms within the daily life of the camp that brought unexpected comfort and purpose. Her hands, once soft from indoor trading post work, now bore the honest calluses of gathering firewood, processing hides, and learning the intricate beadwork that adorned ceremonial clothing. Grey Moon Woman had proven a demanding but patient teacher, guiding Rosalie through the complex social protocols and practical skills that defined Cheyenne womanhood. But on this crisp October morning, as Rosalie helped Laughing Brook prepare medicinal teas from gathered herbs, a commotion at the camp's edge shattered the peaceful routine. Fast Elk, one of the youngest warriors, rode in hard from his scouting patrol, his horse lathered with sweat and his face grim with urgent news. "Armed white men approach from the east," he announced breathlessly to the gathering crowd. 3 riders, heavily armed, asking questions about missing white woman at every homestead and trading post. They offer gold for information about her location. Rosalie's blood turned to ice as she recognized the description. Craw and his remaining outlaws had not given up their search for her, despite weeks of apparent silence. Their persistence suggested more than simple concern about loose ends. They must have discovered evidence that could link them to other crimes, making her survival an existential threat to their continued operations. Ironhawk materialized beside her with the silent efficiency that had saved her life at the river. His expression revealed the calculating alertness of a warrior assessing tactical situations and finding them ominous. They cannot know you are here, he said quietly, but they will search every possible shelter until they find you or confirm your death. Chief Medicine Arrow approached with several senior warriors, their faces showing the grim recognition that the sanctuary they had provided Rosalie might now expose their entire community to deadly consequences. The philosophical debate about cultural bridge building had suddenly transformed into an immediate survival crisis. "Fast Elk," the chief commanded. "Describe these men exactly. Leave out no detail that might help us understand their capabilities and intentions." The young scout straightened under the chief's attention. "Leader has scar across left side of face, rides bay stallion with white markings. Second man is shorter, missing teeth, carries shotgun and rifle both. Third man has black. Beard, left arm seems stiff, like old injury. All wear trail clothes but good equipment, not poor bandits." Rosalie's description of Craw and his companions had prepared the warriors for this possibility, but hearing confirmation of their continued pursuit still sent tension rippling through the assembled group. Standing, Wolf stepped forward with the aggressive posture that had characterized his opposition to Rosalie's presence from the beginning. "This is exactly what I warned would happen," he declared. "White woman brings white violence to our people. We should give her to these men and end the threat to our families." "Those men murdered her husband and tried to kill her," Red Feather countered sharply. "Surrendering her to them would violate every principle of honor our people hold sacred. We might as well invite wolves to eat our children." The generational divide within the band became starkly visible as older warriors who had suffered decades of white aggression lined up behind Standing Wolf's pragmatic position, while younger men who had grown up with more complex, cross-cultural relationships supported Red Feather's moral stance. Grey Moon Woman's voice cut through the developing argument with the authority of age and spiritual wisdom. "The question is not whether we protect this woman. Our word has been given and cannot be withdrawn without destroying our honor. The question is how we protect both her and ourselves from men who bring only death and destruction." Her reframing of the debate shifted focus from philosophical positions to tactical planning, drawing upon the military expertise that had enabled the band to survive decades of frontier conflict. Medicine Arrow nodded approvingly as the discussion turned toward practical considerations. "Iron Hawk," the chief directed, "you know these outlaws' methods and capabilities better than anyone. What strategies will they use to locate the woman?" Iron Hawk's assessment was methodical and chilling. "They will search every possible shelter systematically, starting with most obvious locations and expanding outward. They offer rewards to encourage cooperation, but they also use threats and violence against anyone who might be hiding information. They cannot afford to leave witnesses who could identify them to authorities. So they will keep searching until they find her, or until they are stopped permanently," Medicine Arrow concluded grimly. "Or until they believe she is dead," Rosalie interjected, an idea forming in her mind that would require enormous courage from everyone involved. "What if we made them think they had succeeded in killing me?" The suggestion triggered immediate interest from several warriors who specialized in deception and misdirection during warfare. Black Hawk, whose spiritual visions had influenced the decision to accept Rosalie, leaned forward with obvious curiosity about the tactical possibilities her proposal might create. "Explain your thinking," he urged. Rosalie had been developing the concept while listening to the discussion of their limited options. "If Craw's men found evidence that I had died from my injuries or from exposure in the wilderness, they might abandon their search and leave the area. We could stage a scene that would convince them I was dead without actually revealing my location among your people." Ironhawk immediately grasped the strategic potential of such deception. Create false trail leading away from camp, end at location, where body might have been found and buried or consumed by scavengers. Leave enough evidence to convince searchers, but not so much that they become suspicious of artificial arrangement. "Dangerous plan," Standing Wolf observed, though his tone suggested grudging respect for the tactical thinking involved. "If deception fails, we face armed confrontation with no element of surprise." "If we do nothing," Redfeather pointed out, "we face the same confrontation eventually, but after they have had time to gather reinforcements or involve territorial authorities in their search." The debate that followed demonstrated the sophisticated military planning capabilities that had enabled Cheyenne bands to resist superior numbers and firepower for decades. Various scenarios were analyzed, contingencies planned, and potential complications anticipated with thoroughness that would have impressed professional military strategists. Grey Moon Woman contributed crucial insights about the psychological aspects of successful deception. Men like these expect to find what they are looking for because they cannot imagine failing in their purposes. If we give them a story that confirms their expectations, they will be less likely to question details that might reveal the truth. As the tactical planning session continued, Rosalie found herself awed by the complexity of thought and coordination that indigenous military leaders brought to crisis management. These were not the simple warriors depicted in Eastern newspapers, but sophisticated strategists who combined traditional knowledge with adaptive intelligence. The plan that emerged from several hours of discussion involved multiple elements designed to reinforce each other while providing backup options if any component failed. Fast Elk would continue monitoring the outlaws' movements and search patterns, reporting their progress toward the Cheyenne camp. Meanwhile, Ironhawk and a select team of warriors would create an elaborate deception designed to convince Craw that Rosalie had died in the wilderness. The false trail would begin near the river, where Ironhawk had actually rescued Rosalie, but would lead away from Cheyenne territory toward rocky hills, where bodies might disappear completely through natural processes. Evidence would be carefully placed to suggest that she had escaped the drowning attempt, but had subsequently died from exposure and injuries. "Most important element," Ironhawk explained to Rosalie, "is that you must truly disappear during the time these men search our region. No chance encounters, no accidental sightings, no evidence that White Woman lives among our people." Grey Moon Woman nodded agreement. "There is a sacred cave in the high country where women retreat for spiritual quests and healing ceremonies. You will stay there with Laughing Brook and Silent Fox until the danger passes. Few men know its location, and none would approach without permission from the Women's Council." The plan required Rosalie to trust her safety entirely to Cheyenne protection, while the warriors she had grown to respect risked their lives implementing a deception that could save her from murder, but might also provoke deadly retaliation if discovered. "I understand the risks you're taking for me," she said to the assembled group. "If something goes wrong, and my presence here brings harm to your people, I will never forgive myself." "Worry about staying alive," Redfeather replied with grim humor. "We will handle the tactical complications. Our warriors have been outwitting white enemies since before you were born." As preparations for the deception began in earnest, Rosalie experienced a profound shift in her understanding of what it meant to belong to a community. These people were preparing to risk everything for someone who had been among them for less than a month, demonstrating loyalty and commitment that transcended cultural boundaries and challenged every assumption about tribal cooperation she had absorbed from her previous life. Laughing Brook appeared with supplies for the mountain retreat. Food, warm clothing, weapons, and medicinal herbs that would sustain them during what might be an extended period of hiding. Her calm efficiency masked obvious concern about the dangers they all faced, but her determination never wavered. "My cousins saved your life once," she told Rosalie while packing their gear. "Now all of us work together to save it again. This is how family protects family, even when blood connection does not exist. The concept of chosen family, based on mutual commitment rather than biological relationship, resonated deeply with Rosalie, whose own relatives had rejected her decision to marry Daniel and follow him west. She had found more genuine acceptance and loyalty among the Cheyenne in 3 weeks than she had experienced in years of St. Louis society. As evening approached, Ironhawk and his team departed to begin creating the false trail that would hopefully convince Crow of Rosalie's death. Their departure marked the beginning of the most dangerous phase of the deception, when discovery could mean death for everyone involved in the plan. Rosalie, Laughing Brook, and Silent Fox slipped away from the main camp under cover of darkness, following paths known only to the women of the band toward mountain sanctuaries that had sheltered Cheyenne women for countless generations. The cave Grey Moon Woman had selected lay deep in rocky terrain that would challenge even experienced trackers, protected by natural barriers and spiritual traditions that few outsiders would dare to violate. The journey required most of the night, climbing through increasingly rugged landscape by starlight and intuition. Silent Fox led with the confidence of someone who had made this pilgrimage many times before, while Laughing Brook maintained rearguard vigilance for any signs of pursuit or detection. As dawn broke over the mountain peaks, they reached the sacred cave that would serve as Rosalie's sanctuary during the critical days ahead. The site commanded spectacular views of the valley below, while remaining virtually invisible to observers who didn't know exactly where to look. Inside the cave, previous generations of Cheyenne women had left evidence of their spiritual quests. Painted, symbols on the walls, prayer offerings in natural niches, sleeping areas prepared with soft materials and carefully arranged stones. The atmosphere radiated peace and power that seemed to promise protection for those who sought refuge within its ancient walls. "Now we wait," Laughing Brook said simply, settling into the routine that would govern their lives until the danger passed, "and we trust our warriors to convince evil men that you are beyond their reach forever." Below in the valley, Fast Elk continued his surveillance of Craw's search pattern, noting the systematic thoroughness that confirmed Ironhawk's assessment of their professionalism and persistence. The outlaws were checking every possible shelter and questioning every person they encountered, leaving a trail of intimidation and fear that demonstrated their willingness to use violence against anyone who might oppose their objectives. But they were also moving closer to the carefully prepared deception that would either end their threat permanently or escalate the conflict into open warfare between communities that had been learning to coexist peacefully. The next 24 hours would determine whether Rosalie McKenna would finally find safety among people who had accepted her as family, or whether her presence would bring destruction to the only community that had offered her genuine sanctuary. In a world that seemed determined to destroy everything she valued, in the sacred cave, surrounded by evidence of generations of women who had faced their own crises with courage and wisdom, Rosalie prepared to discover whether the bonds she had formed with her Cheyenne protectors were strong enough to withstand the ultimate test of loyalty and sacrifice. The deception unfolded with the precision of a perfectly choreographed dance of death. Ironhawk and his warriors had spent 2 days creating an elaborate false trail that led from the Missouri River through increasingly treacherous terrain toward the rocky Badlands, where exposure and predators could easily claim an injured survivor. Every detail had been calculated to convince Craw and his men that their quarry had finally succumbed to the wilderness that had initially saved her life. Hidden in the sacred cave high above the valley, Rosalie watched through a carefully concealed observation point as the outlaws followed the fabricated trail with growing confidence. Their systematic destruction of any evidence that might contradict their preferred narrative demonstrated the same ruthless efficiency that had characterized Daniel's murder. But now that efficiency was working against them as they moved deeper into Cheyenne-controlled territory, where every rock and tree could conceal deadly surprises. Craw himself led the search party, his scarred face twisted with the obsessive determination of a man who could not afford to leave any threats to his survival unresolved. Behind him rode his two remaining companions, their alertness gradually diminishing as the false trail confirmed their expectations and drew them further from any possibility of escape or reinforcement. They believe what they want to believe, Laughing Brook observed quietly, studying the outlaws' movement patterns through field glasses that Red Feather had acquired during a trading expedition to Fort Laramie. Men who live by violence expect violence to solve all their problems. They cannot imagine that cunning might defeat strength. Rosalie nodded, though her attention remained focused on the elaborate tactical situation developing in the valley. Below, Fast Elk and 3 other young warriors had positioned themselves along potential escape routes, while Ironhawk's team maintained concealment near the fabricated death scene that would serve as the focal point for the final confrontation. The key? Plan required perfect timing and coordination between multiple groups operating across several miles of rugged terrain. Any mistake could result in the outlaws escaping to continue their threats against both Rosalie and the Cheyenne community that had protected her. But success would eliminate a dangerous criminal organization while demonstrating that indigenous justice could be both more efficient and more honorable than the territorial legal system that had failed to protect innocent settlers. As the outlaws approached the carefully prepared deception site, Ironhawk triggered the next phase of their strategy. A small rock slide, artificially induced but appearing completely natural, blocked the main trail and forced Craw's party to dismount and investigate on foot. This tactical disadvantage would prove crucial in the moments that followed. Craw examined the scattered evidence that Ironhawk's team had planted to suggest Rosalie's final struggle and death, torn clothing that matched her description, bloodstains on rocks that could have resulted from fatal injuries, drag marks that suggested scavengers had disposed of her remains. The fabrication was convincing enough to satisfy men who wanted to believe they had succeeded in eliminating their primary threat. "Found her," Craw announced with savage satisfaction, holding up a piece of fabric that Laughing Brook had deliberately torn from one of Rosalie's dresses. "Looks like she made it this far before the wilderness finished what we started. Saves us the trouble of hunting her down and dealing with her permanent-like." His companions relaxed visibly, the tension that had driven their exhaustive search finally dissipating as they convinced themselves that their problem had been solved by natural forces beyond their control. But their relief made them careless, and carelessness in Cheyenne territory was invariably fatal. The attack came with the swift efficiency that had made Ironhawk's reputation among both his own people and their enemies. Rising from concealment among the rocks like spirits materializing from the earth itself, 6 Cheyenne warriors surrounded the outlaws before they could reach their weapons or retreat to defensive positions. "Do not move," Ironhawk commanded. In English, his Winchester rifle aimed directly at Craw's chest. "You are surrounded and outnumbered. Any attempt to fight will result in immediate death." Craw's scarred face twisted with fury as he realized how completely he had been outmaneuvered. His hand moved instinctively toward his revolver, but Blackhawk's arrow, released from 20 yards away, pinned his gun hand to the wooden stock of his rifle before he could complete the draw. "That was warning," Ironhawk announced calmly. "Next, arrow goes through your heart. Choose carefully." The 2 remaining outlaws, recognizing the hopelessness of their situation, raised their hands in surrender. Years of criminal violence had taught them to recognize superior tactical positions. When they encountered them, and fighting 6 Cheyenne warriors on their home territory represented suicide rather than resistance. "What do you want?" Craw snarled, clutching his wounded hand while glaring at his captors with undisguised hatred. "We ain't got nothing you savages would want." "Justice," Ironhawk replied simply. "For the murder of Daniel McKenna and the attempted murder of his wife, for the terror you have brought to innocent families throughout this territory, for the dishonor you have shown to all laws, both white and Indian." The concept of indigenous justice, operating independently of territorial legal institutions, clearly hadn't occurred to Craw, whose worldview assumed that only white authorities possessed legitimate power to judge and punish criminal behavior. His confusion provided an opening for the educational experience that Ironhawk and his warriors had carefully planned. "Among the Cheyenne people," Red Feather explained as he bound the prisoner's hands with rawhide restraints, "justice requires that crimes be answered by consequences that restore balance to the community that has been harmed. You have taken life and brought fear. These things must be balanced before harmony can return." Chief Medicine Arrow arrived with additional warriors and several tribal elders, transforming the capture into a formal judicial proceeding that would satisfy both Cheyenne legal traditions and the practical necessity of determining appropriate punishment for the outlaw's crimes. "Craw," the chief addressed the lead outlaw with formal dignity, "you stand accused of murder, attempted murder, theft, and bringing violence to our territory. How do you answer these charges?" "I don't answer to no Indian court," Craw spat defiantly. "You got no authority over white men. Territorial government will send soldiers to get us back." Medicine Arrow's expression remained calm, despite the obvious insult to his people's sovereignty and legal authority. "The territorial government has shown no interest in pursuing justice for the crimes you have committed. They did not prevent Daniel McKenna's murder. They did not search for his killers. They did not protect his wife from your continued threats. Therefore, justice falls to those who have the power and wisdom to provide it." The trial that followed demonstrated the sophisticated legal reasoning that governed Cheyenne jurisprudence. Witnesses testified about the outlaw's crimes, evidence was presented and evaluated, and various forms of punishment were debated according to traditional principles that emphasized restoration of social harmony rather than simple retribution. Gray, Moonwoman served as the primary advocate for severe punishment, arguing that men who showed no respect for life or law represented permanent threats to community safety that could only be eliminated through execution. Her position commanded strong support among warriors who had lost family members to white violence over the decades. But Rosalie's unexpected intervention changed the entire dynamic of the proceedings. Descending from her mountain sanctuary with Laughing Brook and Silent Fox, she requested permission to address the tribal court about the appropriate consequences for her husband's killers. "I have the right to speak," she declared, standing before the assembled council with the confidence she had gained through weeks of adaptation to Cheyenne customs. "Among both white and Indian peoples, the family of murder victims may request specific forms of justice." Her knowledge of tribal legal traditions impressed the elders, while her calm demeanor in the presence of the men who had destroyed her previous life demonstrated the emotional strength that had enabled her survival and integration into Cheyenne society. "These men killed my husband and tried to kill me," she continued, looking directly at Craw, despite the hatred burning in his eyes. "They destroyed everything Daniel and I had built together, but executing them will not bring Daniel back or repair the damage they have caused." The direction of her argument surprised everyone present, including Ironhawk, who had expected her to demand the maximum punishment available under either white or indigenous legal systems. Instead, Rosalie proposed, "I ask that they be forced. to work for the families they have harmed, to repair, rebuild, and restore what their violence destroyed. Let them spend their lives serving others rather than pursuing their own selfish interests. The concept of restorative rather than retributive justice aligned perfectly with traditional Cheyenne values while offering a practical solution that would benefit the community rather than simply eliminating threats to it. Several elders nodded approvingly as they considered the wisdom of her proposal. Forced labor is slavery, one of Craw's companions objected. 13th Amendment prohibits that. The 13th Amendment, Redfeather replied with bitter irony, makes exceptions for punishment of criminals duly convicted of their crimes. And it has never prevented white authorities from forcing Indian peoples into conditions that differed little from slavery. The legal and moral complexities of the situation provided Medicine Arrow with an opportunity to demonstrate the superior wisdom of indigenous justice systems while achieving practical outcomes that served multiple community interests simultaneously. The woman speaks wisdom, he declared, after conferring with other tribal leaders. These men will work to repair the damage they have caused. They will rebuild McKenna's trading post under supervision of our warriors. They will provide labor for families who have suffered from similar crimes. They will learn to create rather than destroy, and if they attempt escape or refuse to work, standing, Wolf asked, his skepticism about the effectiveness of such punishment clearly evident. Then they face execution as originally planned, Medicine Arrow replied matter-of-factly. Choice is theirs. Contribute to community welfare or forfeit their lives to community justice. The sentence satisfied both practical and philosophical requirements, while providing Craw and his men with opportunities for redemption that their previous choices had certainly not earned. But it also established a framework for continued indigenous legal authority that challenged territorial assumptions about white supremacy in all matters of law and order. As winter approached and construction began on the new trading post, that would replace the one destroyed during Daniel's murder, Rosalie found herself contemplating the profound changes that had transformed her life through violence, survival, and unexpected acceptance among people her previous culture had taught her to fear. The rebuilt McKenna trading post incorporated both white and Cheyenne architectural techniques, creating a structure that symbolized the cultural bridging that had emerged from tragedy and grown through mutual respect and understanding. Craw and his men worked under constant supervision, their skills gradually improving as they learned to build rather than destroy. Ironhawk had become more than her rescuer and protector. Their shared experiences had created bonds that transcended cultural boundaries while respecting the differences that made their relationship both challenging and rewarding. His proposal of marriage, offered according to both Cheyenne and white customs, represented not just personal commitment, but a symbolic union between communities learning to see beyond their historical mistrust. "You have found peace with your husband's killers," he observed one evening as they watched the construction progress on the new trading post. "This shows wisdom that few people, white or Indian, ever achieve." Rosalie considered his words while studying the scene below, where former outlaws worked alongside Cheyenne craftsmen to create something beautiful and useful from the ashes of destruction and hatred. "I learned from your people that justice isn't about revenge," she replied. "It's about restoring balance and creating conditions where such harm becomes less likely to occur in the future." Their wedding, celebrated according to both traditions, marked not just the union of two individuals, but the successful completion of a cultural bridge that had begun with desperate rescue from drowning and evolved through trust, respect, and shared commitment to principles that transcended racial and cultural divisions. The new trading post prospered under their joint management, serving both white and Cheyenne customers with the fairness and respect that Daniel McKenna had originally established. Craw and his men, their sentences eventually completed, departed the territory with skills and perspectives that made them productive, rather than destructive members of whatever communities they joined next. Years later, as Rosalie taught her, mixed heritage children to speak both English and Cheyenne while navigating the complexities of belonging to multiple cultures simultaneously. She often reflected on the moment when Iron Hawk's decision to save a drowning stranger had changed the trajectory of both their lives and the relationships between their peoples. The trading post had become a symbol of what was possible when courage overcame fear, when wisdom guided justice, and when people chose to build bridges rather than walls between communities that shared the same land under the same vast Montana sky. Daniel's memory lived on not through vengeance against his killers, but through the prosperity and understanding that grew from the seeds of respect he had planted during his brief life on the frontier. In the end, the cold waters of the Missouri River that had nearly claimed Rosalie's life had instead delivered her to a destiny she could never have imagined, one where survival, justice, and love had combined to create possibilities that neither culture could have achieved alone, proving that sometimes the most powerful currents are those that carry us toward unexpected shores where new worlds wait to be discovered and embraced. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.